The world was quiet. Fields stretched under a pale sun. Children laughed as they ran through the dust. Mothers called them home. Fathers repaired nets and fences. It was a fragile peace, so thin the wind itself seemed afraid to break it. Then shadows rolled across the sky. At first, people thought it was only a storm, but storms do not move in rigid formation. Storms do not thunder with the voices of engines that make the ground tremble. Storms do not blot out the sun with walls of steel. When the people looked up, they saw them, ships of the Imperium, colossal, unyielding, drifting like mountains torn from the earth and set afloat in the void. Each bore the Aquila, the double-headed eagle. Once that symbol promised safety. To see it was to believe in protection. On this day, it promised fire. An old man who survived the first strike once said, "I raised my hand to shield my eyes. For a moment I thought we had been chosen, that the Emperor had blessed us." Then the siren screamed. Everything I believed turned to ash. Here lies the paradox at the heart of the Imperium. It declares itself the shield of mankind, yet it has destroyed more human lives than any Xenos empire could dream of. Its fleets carry salvation in one hand and annihilation in the other. From a sealed record of the Inquisition, the Purge is the only way left to protect mankind. Mercy breeds corruption. Purity requires flame. The tone is absolute, no debate, no doubt. In the eyes of the Imperium, destruction is not betrayal, it is duty. Picture the scene from the ground. The sky burns red with dissent. Vast shapes fall, trailing fire. The air grows heavy, thick with fear. For the farmer who has never left his valley, this is not war. It is apocalypse. The children clutch their mothers. The fathers know they cannot fight ships that hang in the clouds like gods. They wait for orders that never come. They wait for judgment. And judgment falls. The first blasts reduce entire districts to cinders. Walls vanish, homes are torn open, the soil itself screams under bombardment. The priests on the ships chant as fire spreads across the land. Their voices echo through vox relays carried on waves of static. Only the pure may live. Only the faithful may endure. It is not war. It is ritual, the extermination of human lives carried out as liturgy. Each burning world becomes another verse in a prayer of fire. One soldier who stood in orbit watching later confessed, "We were told they were no longer human, but they screamed like us when the fire came. They begged like us, they died like us." The Imperium has made these contradictions its creed. To preserve humanity, it destroys humanity. To protect life, it burns entire worlds. And every act is wrapped in the language of salvation. Another report whispers of the same doctrine. They must die so that mankind may live. There is no other path. Words written in the silence of a sealed chamber, but lived out in screams across 1,000 worlds. To live under the Imperium is to live under this shadow. At any moment, a signal might fall from the stars. One order can erase an entire people, and history itself will record them as traitors, mutants, or heretics. Whether true or not no longer matters. The paradox cannot be ignored. An empire that names itself guardian is also the executioner. Every banner, every sermon, every oath of loyalty hides the same truth, that the hand raised to shield may also strike without warning. For those who survived the purges, silence is all that remains. The records are sealed, the words forbidden. Only fragments slip through the cracks. A burned page, a soldier's whisper. A priest's cry that echoes long after the fire fades. This is the truth behind the veil. The Imperium does not only fight the alien, the mutant, the traitor. It has turned its fury upon its own. Worlds of men and women, children and elders, entire cultures erased in the name of purity. One truth hangs in the air. Is the Imperium saving humanity or slowly destroying it? The flames die, but the ash lingers. Fields are empty, voices gone, silence spreads, not the silence of peace, but the silence of erasure. The purge does not begin with drums or banners, it begins with a shadow across the sun. The eagle descends, its wings wide, its promise hollow. Salvation is declared, fire is delivered. History in the Imperium is not a clear window. It is a glass darkened by ash and blood. When we look back, we do not see truth. We see shadows shaped by priests, censors, and the iron hand of the Inquisition. The roots of every purge lie in the age of strife. Those centuries were chaos given form. Warp storms cut worlds apart. Civilizations starved in their isolation. Psychers rose without control, opening doors to nightmares. When Terra was still clawing toward unity, other human colonies burned under the weight of their own madness. In that time, suspicion became survival. To trust your neighbor was dangerous. To trust the stranger was death. Out of that darkness came the Emperor, dragging mankind toward unity with fire and promise. For a brief age, hope seemed possible. The Great Crusade carried banners to the stars. Humanity expanded, rebuilt, dreamed again. But hope is fragile in this galaxy. The Horus heresy shattered it. Brother turned on brother. Legions that once swore loyalty now swore to chaos. Cities that once sang hymns to the Emperor now screamed his name in defiance. The wound left by that betrayal never healed. It festered. It poisoned everything that came after. From that day forward, the Imperium lived in fear of rebellion. Every world was watched, every word measured. To be different was to be dangerous. To dissent was to invite suspicion. The Imperium no longer saw only enemies beyond its borders. It saw them within. On the spires of hive cities, the rich and powerful lived above the smog. Their lives glittered with false light. Below them, in the endless dark of the underhive, billions starved and choked on fumes. These people had no voice. They were fuel. If a purge came, they were the first to burn. The priests used this divide. They filled cathedrals with fear. In one crowded shrine, a confessor screamed until his throat split. Only the pure shall live. Only the faithful shall breathe the Emperor's air. His words echoed over a sea of bowed heads. Some believed, others only trembled. A veteran once whispered his memory of those sermons. We were told the ones outside were twisted, their blood tainted, their children cursed. We believed it because belief was safer than doubt. The machine of the Imperium thrives on such fear. Fear justifies control. Fear makes obedience natural. If the people believe impurity is always at the door, they will thank the Inquisition for its cruelty. They will praise the Astra Militarum for burning villages. They will kneel as fire rains from orbit, because they are told it is salvation. This is the soil where purges grow, a history shaped by trauma. A people taught that mercy is weakness, a church that calls blood sacrifice holy. And still the records remain silent. Official scrolls speak of triumphs, victories, holy wars. The age of strife is reduced to a warning. The Horus heresy is rewritten as a hymn of loyalty and betrayal. What they do not write is this, that from those scars came a system that turns on its own kind again and again, until the line between protection and destruction disappears. The Inquisition rose as both sword and shadow. Its mandate, to guard humanity from corruption. But in practice, it became the final judge of what it means to be human. No court hire, no appeal allowed. A single word from an inquisitor can end a world. In a forgotten archive, one scribe left a warning before he vanished. Do not believe the lies of parchment. The Inquisition does not defend mankind. It defines mankind, and what it defines it can erase. His entry ends there. The next page is torn out, blackened by fire. Across the segmentum solar there are whispers of worlds erased not for rebellion but for thought. A colony questioned the tithe. Its grain vanished into administratum voids while its children starved. Within a month, the planet was marked exterminatus, not because it rose in arms, but because it dared to speak. The machine of history hides such acts under words like cleansing or pacification, but for those who lived it, there was nothing clean. Ash clung to their tongues. Smoke filled their lungs. The skies rained fire, and the sound of prayer was lost beneath the roar of orbital bombardment. When the ecclesiarchy sings of such purges, they call them holy fire. They say the emperor himself demanded the sacrifice. Yet the survivors, few as they are, speak differently. One refugee carved this onto the wall of a refugee camp before vanishing. The emperor did not burn us. Men did. This is the paradox of imperial history. It tells of salvation while drowning in its own blood. Every purge is written as triumph. Every massacre, a hymn. And yet the echoes remain. Rumors, half-burned texts, whispered confessions in the dark corners of hive taverns. The truth lives, but only as a wound. Look upon the hive city of Vedras. Its people were marked by mutation, small, harmless changes born of generations beneath toxic skies. For centuries they served the Imperium loyally, paying tithes, raising regiments. Then one inquisitor declared them tainted. The order was given. Whole sectors of the hive were sealed, burned, purged. The ashes of millions filled the air for weeks. Official records state Vedras cleansed of corruption. Nothing more. To outsiders, it was one more line in the endless litany of imperial control. But to the families who lived there, it was erasure. Their history was stolen, their memory burned. Only silence remains. This silence is not absence, it is deliberate. The Imperium thrives by shaping memory. Where memory resists, it is broken. Where voices speak, they are cut. In this way, the history of purges is not a record, but a scar. Yet even scars tell stories. Walk the ruins of a dead world and you will see patterns. Cities razed with surgical precision. Churches left standing when everything else burned. Piles of bones arranged with care as if to remind survivors what happens to the faithless. These are not accidents. They are messages. One wandering scholar once called it an empire of reminders. Every ruined planet whispers obedience. Every silent wasteland screams loyalty. The Imperium does not need to explain itself. Its ruins explain enough. And so we return to the question that gnaws through history. Is the Imperium protecting humanity or consuming it? Every age offers the same answer, written in blood. From the age of strife to the heresy to the endless centuries of purges, salvation and destruction are indistinguishable. To be saved is to be burned. To be spared is to kneel in the shadow of fire. History in the Imperium is not truth, it is threat. A warning carved in the flesh of 1,000,000 worlds. Obey or be erased. Fear is the foundation of the Imperium. It has been carved into every prayer, every decree, every whispered warning passed from parent to child. After the age of strife, when warp storms tore across the stars and whole civilizations burned, mankind learned to see danger in anything different. A scar on the soul, a mark in the blood, a thought that drifted from the sanctioned path. The ecclesiarchy, priests in their towering cathedrals, voices echoing like thunder, turned fear into faith. They told the masses that only the pure could endure, that the smallest taint would spread like rot through the body of mankind. And the people believed, because belief was safer than doubt, but safety came at a cost. Whole families were branded unfit because a child was born with eyes that gleamed too brightly. Workers disappeared into the lower levels of hive cities, accused of muttering words no one else could understand. Men and women who once fought proudly for the Imperium were reduced to ash because their bloodline was suspected of carrying mutation. Picture the scene. Night in a crowded district. Soldiers in heavy boots knocking on a door. A mother clutching her child, the silver glint of the girl's eyes catching the torchlight. That was enough. That was the proof. The family's fate was sealed before a word was spoken. Inside the chamber of judgment, the interrogator's tone carried no malice, only ice. They are not executed for treachery, they are executed for what they are. This was the logic of survival in the Imperium. Purity was not an aspiration, it was the only shield against annihilation. And yet it was a shield that cut deeper than any blade. Suspicion became a way of life. Neighbors whispered about one another, each betrayal wrapped in the guise of loyalty. To accuse was to prove one's own devotion. To denounce was to earn a moment of safety. The Imperium no longer needed to hunt every heretic. It had taught its people to hunt themselves. Generations were raised in this cycle where fear was inheritance and obedience was the only gift a parent could give their child. The lesson was hammered into every prayer, every catechism. Survival requires sacrifice, and sacrifice means blood. Thus the soil of fear was tilled season after season, until it became fertile ground for purges yet to come. The chambers of judgment were never silent. Stone walls carried every cry, every whispered prayer, every final breath. Citizens learned to dread the echo of heavy doors opening at night, for it meant someone had been chosen. A witness once wrote before his words were erased, "They took them one by one. Father first, then mother, then the girl. The questions did not matter. The answers did not matter. The verdict was already carved." The Inquisition did not speak of mercy. Mercy was weakness. The interrogators were trained to see difference as proof. To hesitate was to risk contamination. In one account, a scribe described how a whole district was purged because a child was born with an extra finger. A small deformity, nothing more. But the priest declared it mutation, a seed of corruption. Soldiers gathered the families, binding their hands with iron wire. "The flame will cleanse what the flesh cannot," the priest intoned. The soldiers obeyed. They always obeyed. Some whispered doubts but never allowed. A guardsman in rusted armor confided to a comrade before the next sweep, "They look like us, they cry like us, but we are told they are not us." The comrade answered with silence. Silence was safer than words. Each act of judgment fed the machinery of belief. The ecclesiarchy spoke of holy duty, claiming these purges were the emperor's will. They painted death as salvation, the erasure of the impure as the only path to survival. And so the cycle deepened. Accusations became currency. A worker seeking favor could point to a rival and whisper tainted. A noble in fear of losing power could denounce a household as corrupted. Once accused, there was no return. No proof could save them, for suspicion itself was enough. What mattered was not truth, but the spectacle. Crowds gathered to watch as families were paraded through the streets. Some spat, some prayed, others looked away, unable to bear it yet too afraid to intervene. In every face was the same knowledge. To pity was to risk joining them. The Imperium did not need to invent heresy. It only needed to remind its citizens that the cost of silence was survival, and the cost of compassion was death. In the cold record of these trials, one sentence appears again and again. They were judged guilty by their existence. Fear was no longer a weapon against the enemy. It became a weapon against humanity itself. The ecclesiarchy wove it into sermons, teaching that every prayer must begin with suspicion. The Inquisition enforced it through trials, ensuring that terror itself was the strongest law of the Imperium. Children grew up learning not to trust even their own parents. In the schools of the Schola Purginium, orphans of war repeated catechisms that praised purity and condemned doubt. Better the innocent burn than the guilty escape, they were told. The lesson was simple. It is safer to destroy than to forgive. This fear hollowed out entire cultures. Music, art, and science dwindled because creativity could too easily be mistaken for deviation. What remained was obedience, ritual, and silence silence was the loudest proof of loyalty. A historian whose work was later declared heretical once wrote, "The Imperium did not preserve humanity. It preserved conformity and called it survival." Across countless worlds, suspicion replaced unity. Instead of binding together against alien threats, citizens turned inward, ready to denounce neighbors, friends, even blood kin. The Imperium thrived on this division, for a divided people were easier to control. The system fed itself. The more purges were carried out, the more proof there seemed to be that corruption was everywhere. Each execution justified the next until the act of cleansing was no longer extraordinary. It was daily life. Even soldiers of the Astra Militarum, hardened by endless war, admitted in private that the purges left scars deeper than any battlefield. One guardsman wrote in a hidden diary, "It is one thing to face the alien. It is another to turn your gun on those who speak your tongue. The Emperor asks both, and so we obey. But obedience does not silence the dreams. Dreams of screams, dreams of burning, dreams of guilt." In time, fear became so natural that few remembered life without it. The Imperium no longer needed to explain the purges. People expected them, like the seasons, like hunger, like death. This was the deepest root, the acceptance that survival meant constant cleansing, that to live in the Imperium was to wait for the knock on the door. The soil had been made ready. All it needed was a spark, and then the purges would erupt on a scale that would scar whole systems. It did not begin with war banners or battle hymns. It began with whispers. Reports carried through the labyrinth of the Inquisition, a system of worlds at the edge of imperial space. Its leaders were said to be meeting with unsanctioned psychers. Priests claimed the sermons on those worlds lacked the proper invocations. Traders spoke of symbols carved into halls that did not match the imperial creed. The signs were small, a phrase spoken in the wrong cadence, a relic of unknown origin, a governor who delayed his tithe for reasons never explained. Yet in the mind of the Imperium, such fragments formed a picture too dangerous to ignore. The Inquisition gathered. In a sealed chamber beneath a cathedral spire, shadows moved across walls lined with candles. The air was thick with smoke, no music, no chanting, only the scrape of parchment, the hiss of wax, the measured voices of judgment. One witness, later executed for speaking of it, described the moment. They did not debate, they declared. One after another their voices rose, calm and absolute. The verdict was already chosen before the meeting began. The senior inquisitor raised a hand, his eyes reflecting the flame of the candles. We cannot risk corruption spreading. There is no time for doubt, no time for correction. These worlds must be purged. There was no outcry, no dissent. In silence, the others nodded. 7 hours later, the decree was sealed with the sigil of the Inquisition. The words were few. By the will of the Emperor, this system shall be cleansed, its leaders eradicated, its people erased. The priests of the ecclesiarchy soon added their voice, as they always did. In sermons that rang through the void, they declared the purge holy, the flame sacred. Citizens on faraway worlds heard the echoes and trembled, for they knew that once a precedent was set, no one was beyond suspicion. Soldiers of the Astra Militarum received the orders with their usual discipline. Some asked no questions, others asked too many, but only in private. The answer was always the same. Obedience is survival. Doubt is treason. For the governors of nearby systems, the message was clear. Align yourselves with the Imperium without hesitation or risk annihilation. To them, the purge was less a warning against heresy and more a reminder that imperial wrath required no proof, only suspicion. Thus the spark was struck, a chain of decisions born from whispers, signed in candlelight, justified in the name of purity. And from that spark would come fire enough to consume whole worlds. The Imperium did not choose extermination because it was easy. It chose extermination because it no longer believed in anything else. Centuries of betrayal had burned away the notion of mercy. From the Horus Heresy to the countless uprisings that followed, every attempt at negotiation had ended in blood. To grant time was to grant the enemy space to grow stronger. And so the lesson hardened into doctrine. Corruption cannot be corrected. It can only be destroyed. The words of an inquisitor recovered from a forbidden transcript speak with chilling clarity. Heresy spreads faster than fire. A single spark can burn a planet. It is not for us to measure degrees of guilt. It is for us to ensure the flame dies before it consumes us all. In the logic of the Imperium, this was not cruelty. It was survival. A system of billions could be sacrificed if it meant protecting trillions elsewhere. To question this arithmetic was to stand against the Emperor himself. Yet in the shadows, doubts remained. One officer in the Astra Militarum scribbled words in the margin of his orders. What if they are innocent? What if the only crime is being accused? The note was found. The officer was executed before dawn. His regiment marched without pause. The purge of the targeted system unfolded with terrifying efficiency. Orbital bombardments reduced cities to ash before soldiers ever set foot on the soil. Those who surrendered were herded together, marked as tainted, and incinerated in great pyres that turned night into a second day. Priests raised their arms toward the sky, calling the fire divine. The official reports spoke of victory. They listed numbers of enemies slain, heretics purged, structures cleansed. But nowhere did they speak of mothers, fathers, and children. Nowhere did they admit that most victims died without ever knowing what they were accused of. From this moment on, the path of the Imperium was set. Where doubt had once lingered, certainty now ruled. Where investigation once mattered, suspicion alone was enough. The purge became not just a weapon but a reflex. A final line from a sealed memorandum reads, "The order was given in 7 hours. The destruction lasted 7 years. No voice rose against it." This was the true fire, not the bombardments, not the flames of exterminatus. The true fire was acceptance, the quiet, obedient nod of those who carried out the purge and those who watched in silence. And so the stage was prepared. The spark of suspicion had ignited a blaze, and the Imperium would let it spread, sanctified and unstoppable. The purge did not begin with fanfare. There were no drums, no banners, no triumphant horns to declare what was coming. It began with silence, an oppressive weight that hung over entire systems. The silence of orders passed in sealed chambers, carried through encrypted vox, and confirmed by the cold stamp of authority. On the world of Kalor Prime, the first signal came not to its people but to its skies. The void darkened as battle fleets emerged, their hulls blotting out the constellations. To those below, they looked like fragments of heaven torn loose, vast and merciless. Children pointed at the glimmer of engines, laughing as though they had seen falling stars. Mothers whispered prayers to the Emperor, their voices trembling. No warning came, no proclamation, only the shadow of iron crossing the firmament. Inside the flagship Iron Oath, the council chamber glowed with the dim light of hololithic projectors. A map of Kalor Prime rotated above the table, every hive spire, every manufactoria plane, every teeming slum marked in pale blue. Inquisitors stood in silence, their robes heavy with dust and authority. One raised a hand, his face unreadable in the half-light. "The taint has spread too far," he said at last. "Reclamation is no longer possible. Cleansing is the only path." No voice challenged him. No hesitation cracked the chamber. Each man and woman present knew the outcome before the words were even spoken. The order was sealed within 7 hours. Exterminatus. Down in the hives, the people had no word for what hung above them. They saw shapes in the clouds, the promise of salvation. The ecclesiarchy had told them, "The Emperor sends his angels." The masses gathered in courtyards, craning their necks to glimpse the ships. They brought their children, their relics, their last offerings of faith. They did not know that those ships carried only death. The ritual of destruction began with precision. Orbital platforms locked onto coordinates, their machine spirits humming in cold obedience. Cyclonic torpedoes slid from their cradles, each one the size of a cathedral. Engines roared, launching them toward the planet's crust. The sky lit up, streaked with fire that painted every spire in blood-red light. In a mining district, a worker lifted his son so he could see. "Look," he whispered. "The Emperor blesses us." A moment later, the torpedo struck the ground beyond the ridge. The earth convulsed. Stone and steel twisted like paper. The child never saw the second fire, or only the darkness that followed. From orbit, the officers of the Iron Oath watched. They did not cheer. They did not flinch. The devastation was not a victory to them, but procedure. One of them recorded in a flat voice, "Target strike successful. Civilian density irrelevant. Progress is within tolerance." Below, Kalor Prime burned. Hive towers collapsed inward, devoured by firestorms that turned ferrocrete to slag. Oceans boiled into vapor, clouds rising like funeral shrouds to choke the sky. Across the farmlands, people ran without direction. Their shadows stretched long under the false dawn of fire. But there was nowhere left to flee. In the ruins of the Capitol spire, a priest raised his arms as the ceiling shattered and fire rained through. His voice carried over the screams, "Rejoice, for you are made pure in his light." Then the flames consumed him, leaving only smoke where his faith had stood. The Purge had begun. Kalor Prime was the first flame, and its fire had only just begun to spread. The silence did not last. Once the first torpedo fell, the machinery of annihilation advanced without pause. Orders rippled across Kalor Prime, carried on encrypted Vox signals, each confirmation binding millions to death. The Purge was no outburst of rage. It was cold procedure, calculated and sanctified. On Kalor Prime, the firestorm spread from the spires outward. Entire hive towers cracked at their foundations. Manufactoria crumbled into ash as detonations tore through the ground beneath them. Ferrocrete slabs the size of hab blocks collapsed, burying thousands in moments. To those orbiting above, the destruction appeared as lines of light racing across a tactical display, hive after hive reduced to red blips that winked out one by one. In the Manufactoria districts, workers fled to the assembly squares, desperate for answers. The ecclesiarchy had promised them angels, not fire. They carried relics. They brought their children. They waited for salvation. But the blast doors closed with a hiss of steel. The courtyards became cages. And when the flames reached them, there was nowhere to go. The ritual of death moved with clockwork precision. First came the bombardments, cyclonic torpedoes slamming into the crust, splitting tectonic plates, turning magma into weapons. The earth itself became the executioner, swallowing cities as the ground buckled and ruptured. Then came the atmospheric cleansing. Warheads released chemical clouds that spread across the wind. Invisible, unstoppable, they seared lungs and corroded metal, stripping the last breath from those who thought they had escaped the fire. From orbit, officers of the Iron Oath recorded each stage. Their reports were not stories of horror, but sterile lines of data. Primary strike complete, hive density reduced by 97%. Civilian resistance negligible. The words fell like stone into the silence of the chamber. Death measured to the decimal. Not all were untouched by doubt. In one containment zone, a guardsman herded families into holding pens. A girl clutched at his sleeve, eyes wide, searching his face for something human. For a heartbeat, he faltered. His rifle dipped. The crowd surged with hope. His lips trembled as if words long buried might force their way out. He remembered his own sister waiting for him light years away, and for a moment the faces blurred. Then the shout of a commissar cut the air. Training smothered mercy. The butt of his weapon struck the girl's back, driving her to the ground. The crowd's hope collapsed with her. When the flames came, his face was hidden beneath soot, and no one could tell if the wet on his cheeks was sweat or something far more human. In the underhives, death came slower. Ventilation cut. Access gates welded shut. Entire districts suffocated in the dark. The forgotten clawed at Ferrocrete until their nails tore away. Some cursed the Emperor, others begged his light. Both prayers ended the same, swallowed in silence. To the people, the skies bled fire, oceans boiled, turning to walls of steam that swept inland and scalded everything alive. Towers that had endured for millennia toppled like brittle bones. Survivors fled into wastelands already poisoned by ash. Their shadows stretched long against horizons shattered by flame. But to the officers on the bridge, these were nothing but markers erased on a map. Even the priests gave the slaughter holy names. In ruined cathedrals, they raised arms as ceilings collapsed and heat washed over their flocks. "Be glad," one cried, voice ragged. For the Emperor has chosen you. His sermon ended in fire, the last hymn reduced to a scream. Calor Prime burned, its life stripped away layer by layer until only smoke and ruin remained. The world's death was not mourned. No lament was etched into records, only the data of compliance written in sterile script. Exterminatus complete. Population eradicated, strategic contamination resolved. When the smoke cleared, Calor Prime was gone. Nothing remained but ash, silence, and a single line in the Iron Oath's log. Exterminatus complete. Population eradicated, strategic contamination resolved. Above the burning ruins, new orders already waited. The fleets did not rest. The purge spread like a disease written in fire. One world fell, then another, and another after that. Fleet orders traveled faster than light, a chain of sealed decrees bearing the same command: cleanse, erase, move on. To the Inquisition, it was not war but procedure. To the billions beneath the stars, it was the end of everything. On the hive world of Marek, the sky broke open at dawn. From the spires, citizens saw ships like floating cathedrals eclipse the sun. The bells of the ecclesiarchy rang out in triumph, proclaiming deliverance. Priests shouted from the balconies, calling the faithful to gather. Crowds filled the courtyards, their voices raised in hymns. The hymns were drowned by the roar of cyclonic detonations. Within minutes, the spires that had stood for 10 millennia toppled like brittle glass. Ash buried the faithful where they knelt. Far from Marek, on the agri-world of Soria, there were no spires, only endless fields of grain. Farmers looked up as the soil split apart, fire racing along the furrows they had plowed for generations. Livestock screamed, panicked herds scattering as the sky turned a molten red. Families fled toward irrigation canals, clutching what few belongings they could carry. But there was no refuge from the torrent that followed. Entire harvests combusted in seconds, wheat transformed into oceans of flame. The fields of Soria, once called the breadbasket of a subsector, became a funeral pyre stretching from horizon to horizon. In the forge works of Helgrath, the purge unfolded differently. The Manufactoria was a labyrinth of furnaces and titanic machines, its people raised from birth to serve the forges. When the order came, orbital bombardment struck with surgical precision, collapsing reactor cores and igniting plasma conduits. Whole districts melted into rivers of steel and slag. Servitors marched into the flames without hesitation, their final commands instructing them to maintain production, even as their bodies dissolved. The skies rained molten metal. The forges fell silent for the first time in recorded history. Each extermination followed the same rhythm, repeated like a chant. A signal sent, coordinates locked, torpedoes launched, flames descending. Reports filed in cold monotone. Strike complete, losses within tolerance, proceeding to next target. And then silence, broken only by the static of dying Vox relays. From orbit, officers watched through holofeeds, their faces pale in the glow of annihilation. One commissar removed his cap and pressed it to his chest, his lips moving in a prayer no one else could hear. Another officer's hand trembled above the report slate before steadying again. The chamber allowed no weakness. Doubt was a crime, so their faces hardened, masks of duty concealing the fractures within. To them it was not cruelty but necessity. To the Inquisition, each burning world was a line struck from a ledger. Yet to those who lived below, it was indistinguishable from damnation. Whispers spread even in the midst of erasure. Survivors carried fragments of memory, voices echoing in void-bound refugee ships. a mother holding her child as the skies fell, a priest who shouted blessings through blood and fire, a soldier who refused to raise his weapon and was burned alongside those he would not kill. These voices did not alter the decree, but they lingered like ghosts, testifying in silence against the machinery of salvation. By the time the fleets withdrew, sectors once vibrant were reduced to charred voids marked only by orbital debris. No banners hung, no monuments rose. Nothing was left but silence. The silence of planets scoured clean, of histories ended in a single breath. And still the purge advanced. For each world struck from the map, another awaited in ignorance. For each life extinguished, 10 more stood unknowing beneath skies that would soon turn red. The fire was not confined. It spread outward, unrelenting, until the Imperium itself seemed less a guardian of mankind than its executioner. The galaxy burned in the name of purity, and there was no end in sight. Final report entered. Iron Oath Command Log. Exterminatus Protocol confirmed. Sector compliance, acceptable losses. Proceed to next target. The purge left behind not only ash, but silence. And in that silence, questions. Who had given the order? Whose hand guided the fleets with such certainty? Among the shifting layers of authority, one figure stood at the center. An inquisitor whose name was spoken only in whispers. To the people he was faceless. To the commanders of the fleet he was absolute. His seal was enough to turn a world to dust. He was not a man of half measures. Records describe him as gaunt, his features hidden behind the hood of a sable cloak, eyes like cold iron. To his acolytes he declared, hesitation is treason. Pity is heresy. The Emperor does not forgive delay. Those words, etched into countless transcripts, became the justification for fire. Behind him moved the machinery of faith. The ecclesiarchy, never far from the Inquisition's shadow, gave voice to what would otherwise be unspeakable. Where fleets delivered death, priests delivered explanation. They stood in shattered cathedrals and burning courtyards, proclaiming, "We do not kill them, we deliver them. The flames are not punishment, but freedom." In every sermon, annihilation was rebranded as absolution. The synergy was deliberate. The Inquisitor held authority. The ecclesiarchy supplied legitimacy. Together they bent the will of the Astra Militarum. For soldiers, the Emperor's name was a weight heavier than any chain. When priests called the torpedo a blessing, when inquisitorial sigils marked the order as sacred, who among the rank and file could refuse? Yet not all hearts were stone. In the void ship hangars, whispers crept like smoke. Men preparing their lasguns for deployment shared glances they dared not voice aloud. One young trooper muttered to his sergeant, "But they are humans." The sergeant did not answer. He only gestured toward the inquisitorial seal above the command terminals and said, "Do you want to be next?" Silence swallowed the rest. Reports from the fleet show the strain. After Kalor Prime, requisitions for amasec and combat stimulants spiked. Morale officers noted increased reluctance to carry out secondary sweeps, a phrase buried in a 1,000-page archive of statistics. But hesitation was not tolerated. Officers who questioned the pace of exterminations disappeared from duty rosters. In their place came men who did not ask questions. The Inquisitor himself never wavered. To his inner circle he confided, "Compassion is the weapon of the enemy. We cleanse not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Better a billion innocents burn than one heretic endure." His words carried the cold weight of doctrine, a logic as pitiless as the void. To him, extermination was not horror. It was arithmetic. The ecclesiarchy amplified this arithmetic with liturgy. Before each orbital strike, choirs were assembled in the flagship's cathedral hold. Hymns echoed through vox lines, reaching even the ears of those about to die. One refrain was repeated endlessly. Through fire we are made pure. For the priests, this was truth. For the civilians below, it was the last sound they heard before the skies turned red. And still, in the barracks, soldiers spoke differently when the priests were gone. Some carved small marks into the bulkhead for each world destroyed, not in pride, but in mourning. One Vox recording recovered decades later captured a hushed exchange. "We've killed more than any orc warlord ever did. Keep your voice down. The Inquisition doesn't forgive words." That tension, the absolute certainty of command versus the fragile doubt of men, was the engine that drove the Purge forward. The Inquisitor did not need every soldier to believe. He needed only obedience. Belief was optional. Silence was mandatory. Historians piecing together these events describe a triangle of power. At its apex, the Inquisition, robed in secrecy, issuing decrees with the force of divine law. At its base, the ecclesiarchy draping those decrees in scripture, turning slaughter into sacrament. And between them, the Astra Militarum, countless soldiers reduced to extensions of the trigger, their humanity dissolved in the gears of obedience. It was not one man who burned Calor Prime, nor one council, nor one fleet. It was an entire system that converged, self-justifying, self-reinforcing. Orders came down. Hymns rose up, soldiers obeyed, and in the end, entire worlds were silenced beneath the combined weight of faith and fear. The Purge had leaders, yes, but more frightening was the truth that it also had followers, millions who did not believe yet still obeyed. The Inquisition gave the command. The ecclesiarchy gave the blessing. The Astra Militarum pulled the trigger. Together they burned worlds into silence. The fires of Exterminatus did not end when the last torpedo struck. They lingered in the silence, in the ash, in the hollowed-out void where once there had been life. The aftermath was not only death, but the pattern of who died and who survived. In the hive slums, the poor had no chance. When alarms blared, there were no shuttles waiting, no evacuation corridors, no coded instructions from the administratum. They were told nothing. At best, they were herded into squares and sealed beneath blast doors. Sold the illusion of safety while the skies rained fire. Mothers clutched children beneath ferrocrete arches, whispering the emperor's name. Workers, exhausted from endless shifts, carried only the tools in their hands. Some raised fists in defiance, others fell to their knees in prayer. Neither mattered. Fire consumed both equally. One observer's log, later buried in restricted archives, read, "Civilian resistance negligible. Population below hive-level gamma eradicated without record. No survivors anticipated. The lower tiers of Calor Prime, millions strong, vanished without even the courtesy of being remembered." The soldiers of the Astra Militarum bore the weight in silence. They were the ones who herded families into holding pens, who barred gates, who fired warning shots when crowds surged for non-existent transports. For them, duty was heavier than survival. In one hab block, a guardsman muttered to his comrade, "But they are men. They are our people." His voice trembled with something dangerously close to compassion. The commissar standing behind him heard every word. A report was filed. By next dawn, the guardsman's name no longer appeared on any roster. His lasgun was reassigned. His silence became permanent. Those who obeyed survived only in body. Many carried memories that no prayer or indoctrination could scour away. Some drowned their doubt in reciting the imperial creed louder than anyone else. Others grew hollow, repeating orders without thought, ghosts in uniform. The Purge killed the flesh of billions, but it also hollowed the souls of those who survived to enforce it. The ruling elite knew long before the fire fell. Encrypted orders moved through noble houses, whispered in council chambers. For the wealthy, ships stood ready. Shuttles bore their banners. Vox codes opened sealed corridors. They escaped not because they were pure, but because they had the privilege of knowing. From orbit, officers noted, nobility evacuated under sanctioned pretext. Compliance within acceptable parameters. To the common folk below, the sudden disappearance of their lords was inexplicable. They prayed for their return, never knowing they had already abandoned them. The rich fled with vaults of artifacts, relics, even slaves to serve them in exile. The poor remained as ash to cover the ruins. Thus the Purge was never equal. It was selective by design. Entire bloodlines survived untouched, while the nameless multitudes became fuel for a creed that called itself salvation. The ecclesiarchy spoke with the voice of certainty, even as their congregations burned. Priests told the crowds, "We do not kill you. We free you. This is not death. It is the Emperor's mercy." Those words echoed through cathedrals as ceilings collapsed, through courtyards as firestorms swallowed worshippers whole. For the faithful who died hearing them, the pain became proof of sanctity. For the survivors, the sermons twisted memory into obedience. On other worlds, the story was rewritten before the ash cooled. The sermons turned slaughter into liturgy. Kalor Prime was no longer a dead world. It was a test of purity. Its end became an example for others to fear, obey, and continue kneeling. Inquisition archives later summarized, faith reinforced, local resistance minimized, narrative preserved. Even the ashes became propaganda. An internal administratum ledger discovered centuries later carried the summary. Casualty classification, hive underclass total, manufactoria workforce total, ecclesiarchy lower clergy partial, nobility evacuated under authority seal, Imperial Guard detachment 42% attrition, remainder reassigned, conclusion objectives achieved, losses acceptable. The language was stripped of emotion, reduced to decimals and classifications. Nowhere did it mention the faces of children who thought the falling torpedoes were angels, or the soldier who hesitated before striking down a girl. History in the Imperium was not written in memory but in compliance. The direct aftermath of Exterminatus was not only scorched cities and oceans of steam. It was the division laid bare. The poor were left to die. The soldiers survived but bore invisible wounds. The rich escaped and rewrote the story. The ecclesiarchy sanctified fire as holy light. For the Inquisition, this was not tragedy. It was success. For the Imperium, it was not shame. It was procedure. But in the cracks of silence, in whispered doubts between soldiers, in the terrified eyes of those left behind, the truth lingered. The Imperium did not merely purge the guilty. It consumed its own people, selectively, deliberately, while calling it salvation. The fires of the Purge left behind ash, ruin, silence, entire populations erased, their names reduced to footnotes in the ledgers of compliance. Yet beneath the devastation, a darker truth whispered, through sealed archives, through forbidden testimonies. Not every world burned for heresy. Some were marked for reasons colder: political maneuvering, the settling of rivalries, the concealment of failure. The official histories spoke only of corruption, of heretical cults, of worlds beyond salvation. But in the margins of classified reports, another story bled through. Segmentum Tempestus Archive, file redacted. Finding: no confirmed demonic incursion, no Xenos presence detected, no cult activity identified. Outcome: exterminatus carried out under inquisitorial authority. Annotation: handwritten, unidentified. Better ash than questions. One such world was Neuralis IV, a thriving agri-colony. Its harvests fed 5 surrounding systems. Whispers of inefficiency reached the ear of an ambitious governor in a neighboring subsector. Accusations blossomed. Rumor turned into sedition. By the time inquisitorial agents arrived, the verdict was sealed. The evidence was thin, the charges hollow. But the political winds demanded fire. The order was given. Cyclonic torpedoes reduced Neuralis IV to a cinder. Its fertile plains, once stretching beyond the horizon, became glass. To the public it was proclaimed, the taint of chaos rooted out. To those who knew, it was convenience. 10 million innocents, buried with a rival's ambition, a scribe who witnessed the falsification scrawled in the margin of his draft. No heresy found. But the Inquisitor smiled when the seal was set. He said, "History remembers only what we allow it to." And Neuralis IV was not alone. Countless worlds shared its fate. Some, like Targanin Reach, were condemned not for rebellion, but for exhaustion. Its manufactoria had failed quotas in a war against the Orcs. Shipments delayed. The guard paid in blood. Someone had to answer. High Command refused to admit collapse. Instead, the planet was branded suspect of sedition. When the fleets arrived, the people gathered in prayer. They believed aid had come. The skies opened with fire. Inquisitorial dispatch. Date redacted. No hostile presence detected. Civilian unrest negligible. Nonetheless, by decree, cleansing initiated. Addendum: let it be known that negligence wears the same mask as treachery. Officials who balked vanished. Doubt itself became a crime. And so, to the common citizen, explanations remained simple, absolute. Heresy purged, emperor's light preserved. No one spoke of governors silencing rivals, of generals burying failure in blood, of inquisitors reshaping truth with a stroke of seal. In those sealed chambers where verdicts were born, justification was spoken with chilling calm. We do not kill them. We liberate them. Better a billion dead than one question unanswered. Better silence than scandal. The victims left no voice. Their ashes bore no testimony. Their names erased. Their memory forbidden from mourning. Only in forbidden fragments did truth linger. Scribbled notes, unsanctioned Vox recordings. Half-burned archives, each one waiting to damn those who called themselves saviors. What was whispered in margins was more dangerous than any heretical text. That the Imperium destroyed loyal worlds. Not for faith, not for purity, but for convenience. And those whispers did not fade. They accumulated, locked in vaults too deep for daylight, until the silence itself became indictment. The purge was never only about faith, sometimes about fear, sometimes about pride, more often about power. And in the deepest vaults of the Inquisition, where sealed files bore the mark of absolute secrecy, the scale of these hidden purges weighted. An archive of blood, an archive of lies. In the aftermath of every purge, the ashes were not the end. Records had to be written, histories had to be constructed, and above all, the truth had to be buried. That was where the Inquisition thrived, not only as executioners, but as architects of silence. Deep within their archives, scribes labored under oath and fear, compiling volumes no eye but the inquisitors would ever see. The paradox was cruel. Record everything, then erase it. Personal memorandum. Scribe lex utherin. Omega-level clearance. I have written the death of 3 worlds today. All 3 died innocent. My ink is still wet with their names, but already the master orders redaction. He tells me, what is truth if not what we decree? My hands shake as I burn the parchments. The inquisitors were not blind to contradiction. Some embraced it, others exulted in it. Lord Inquisitor Sarath Vaynar became infamous for declaring, heresy is not only rebellion against the Emperor, heresy is failure, heresy is weakness, heresy is doubt. If 10 loyal worlds must burn to hide one failure, the Emperor is glorified by their ash. Under such men, exterminations became less about faith, more about politics. A governor aligned with rivals? His planet infested with cults. A cardinal refusing tithe? His diocese tainted with heresy. A manufactorum behind quota? Its workforce corrupted by sloth. Evidence was unnecessary. The Inquisitor's word sufficed. Once spoken, nothing could outweigh it. Scribes who questioned were silenced. Witnesses who saw too much were reassigned to fronts where survival was measured in hours. Vox transmissions erased mid-sentence. Fragments spliced into condemnations never meant. Intercepted Vox log. Origin classified. Unknown voice. But my lord, there is no cult here, only transmission cut, replaced by sanctioned broadcast. Authoritative voice. Chaos infestation confirmed, exterminatus sanctioned. The process became ritual. Orders of death signed in candlelit chambers. Prayers whispered as wax seals pressed down. Entire bureaucracies labored to ensure the lie seamless. And yet truth bled through the cracks. Servitors carried corrupted data blocks. Librarians whispered of files that should not exist. On remote worlds, fragments survived, carved into stone, hidden in shrines, spoken in secret liturgies of grief. Every fragment revealed the same pattern: loyal populations annihilated, their loyalty erased, their memory rewritten, each time justified by the same phrase, for the survival of the Imperium. But survival at what cost? Testimony. Unnamed adept of the administratum, discovered centuries later. I copied the figures, I know the truth. They kill not because of sin, but because of fear. Fear of weakness, fear of scandal, fear of truth. If this is loyalty, then loyalty itself is a lie. The Inquisition's power was not merely in deciding who lived or died, but in deciding who was remembered. In their hands, history itself became weapon, sharper than any blade, more final than any bombardment. A dead world left ash. A censored record left nothing. Thus the darkest truth was not that innocence burned. It was that their erasure was total. They were not merely killed, they were unmade. And in this void of memory, the Imperium discovered its greatest weapon. For if no one remembers the crime, was there ever a crime at all? The flames did not end with the dying of worlds. Fire consumes swiftly, but the scars it leaves linger for centuries, carved into flesh, stone, and memory. The purge carried out in the name of salvation left consequences that no decree of the Inquisition could erase. Children became orphans by the millions, wandering through blackened ruins where no birds sang and no crops grew. On Dairos III, a girl no older than 7 was recorded in the logs of a relief frigate. Her skin was streaked with ash, her hands raw from digging through rubble. When asked her name, she only whispered, "Everyone I knew is gone." Her words were never entered into official records. To the Imperium, she was not a survivor, only an anomaly, an inconvenience to be relocated, processed, and forgotten. The ecological ruin was as vast as the human toll. Oceans boiled into vapor, searing entire continents into deserts. Fertile plains collapsed into lifeless dust. The air of some worlds turned toxic, a poison born not of chaos but of imperial ordinance. Plants and wildlife vanished, leaving ecosystems irreversibly damaged. Centuries of agricultural knowledge and genetic diversity, carefully preserved in gene vaults, were lost. Generations later, descendants of refugees bore the scars of those losses. Lungs weakened by smoke, bones brittle from malnutrition, and spirits hollowed by fear. Each purge lasted hours. Its echoes endured for lifetimes. Survivors recalled siblings, parents, neighbors, all erased. Entire communities vanished without a trace, leaving behind only charred foundations and silent memories. But the deepest wound was not physical. It was trust. The Imperium demanded loyalty above all else, loyalty to the Emperor, to his church, to his throne. Yet how could loyalty endure when the throne itself had ordered annihilation? Soldiers whispered in barracks that the fires they unleashed might one day turn on them. Planetary governors lived in dread, knowing a single accusation could condemn not only their reign, but their entire world. A guardsman stationed on the outskirts of a burned hive recorded in a hidden diary, "We thought we served humanity. Now we serve a ledger. We strike, we report, and the world dies. The children stare at us as if we are devils in his name." The Imperium's bureaucrats were no less affected. Archives filled with centuries of research, cultural records, and technological schematics were consumed in secure vaults, either destroyed intentionally or abandoned to flame. Knowledge that could have saved generations was lost forever. The genetic archives of entire worlds were corrupted or obliterated, erasing unique strains of humanity painstakingly cultivated for millennia. The ecclesiarchy worked tirelessly to reshape memory. Sermons recast the purges not as tragedies but as tests, divine crucibles meant to prove humanity's worth. Priests stood above smoldering ruins, voices rising over the sobs of survivors. The Emperor has not abandoned you. He has chosen you to suffer so that others may endure. Yet beneath these proclamations lay a silence darker than any heresy, the silence of erased histories. Whole civilizations vanished from the stars, their names struck from records, their cultures reduced to whispers in forbidden archives. 1,000 dialects lost, 1,000 songs never sung again. Religious relics, artworks, and inventions, once symbols of human ingenuity, turned to ash. And with each world destroyed, humanity diminished, not only in number but in spirit. Imperium claimed to protect mankind's future, yet with every purge it consumed the very inheritance it sought to preserve. Technology, bloodlines, memory, obliterated, sealed, forgotten. Even those who survived carried the weight of despair. Children grew into adults who never knew families. Soldiers haunted by the screams of civilians questioned their purpose. The psychological toll was silent but profound. Societies rebuilt themselves with caution, suspicion, and a gnawing fear of authority. In the end, the true cost was not measured in bodies but in the slow erosion of the species itself. What is humanity when its greatest empire survives by devouring its own children? The Imperium had saved nothing. It had purged, yes, but the cost was a legacy of ashes. And yet, the flames would always return somewhere else. Another world marked by decree, another generation forced to endure the weight of protection. The galaxy was quieter now, but only because the survivors dared not speak too loudly. Those who remembered whispered in void-bound ships, recounting charred memories of families, of cities, of skies torn asunder. They spoke in fragments, voices trembling for fear that the memory itself could attract notice. And so the Purge left its final mark. Silence, despair, and the unshakable knowledge that the Imperium's hand could fall anywhere, at any time. The fire of one world had passed. Others would follow. Humanity was slowly hollowed from within, yet the galaxy celebrated victories elsewhere, unaware of the silent devastation carried out in its name. Across the stars, victories were celebrated. When the orcs fell to the fleets of the Imperium, banners flew, voxcasters blared. The subsector hailed the triumph. Children drew pictures of space marines, heroic figures standing against green-skinned beasts. Priests declared miracles. They claimed the Emperor's hand had struck swiftly and justly. Every chronicle praised efficiency, courage, and glory. The story of orcs reduced to ashes became legend. It was repeated in Hololithic archives and sung in the hives as inspiration. On Catachan, the battlefields were littered with the dead, yet every fallen soldier was honored. Records detailed each strike, each maneuver, each victory in meticulous cadence. The populace knew who had lived, who had died, who would inherit the planet. There was pride in the destruction because the enemy was alien, monstrous, irredeemable. Humanity had been defended. No one questioned the cost. Over Kalor Prime, Marek, and Soria, the skies burned red. The people below had no idea what was coming. These were not enemies. They were children, artisans, farmers, priests. No trumpets sounded for their deaths. Imperial historians recorded numbers, not names. Reports logged efficiency, not heroism. The destruction fell like a shadow. It was deliberate, precise, unseen by those who did not issue it. On Marek, one survivor hid among the ruins of her block. Her eyes were wide as priests preached of purity and salvation. Fire consumed her neighbors. "They call it cleansing," she whispered, "but it is not mercy. It is the Emperor's hand, and it is cold." Meanwhile, on the battlefields of Makrag, where orcs had gathered, similar death had occurred. But every strike was announced, every victory documented. Children could name the heroes. Every survivor remembered the enemy. Every survivor remembered the valor needed to overcome them. When the smoke rose from the greenskins' pyres, it symbolized triumph, not despair. Even the soldiers of the Astra Militarum knew the difference. One commissar noted after Kalor Prime's cleansing, "We do not fight an enemy here. We erase our own. The ledger demands it." His words were hushed, recorded only in private journals. There was no medal, no song, no glory. The Imperium celebrated extermination of aliens, yet turned away from extermination of humans. Heroes were made from battles against the orcs. Silence followed battles against men, women, and children. The records became a void, where entire histories were erased. This contrast extended to public perception. Citizens cheered when Eldar craft worlds were struck. Festivals commemorated victories over squats. Statues of space marines were erected. Lessons were taught to younglings. Defend humanity. Overcome the Xenos. Yet the same children never heard of the worlds lost to the Inquisition's decree. The names vanished, the cultures disappeared. The stories were forbidden. Even whispers of rebellion were scrubbed from memory. Only fear and obedience remained. From orbit, officers observed both kinds of warfare. One remarked in a log, voice steady but cold. Alien threat neutralized, morale high. Human purge executed, compliance with intolerance. The difference was not just words. It was intent, narrative, and legacy. Against orcs, the Imperium was savior. Against its own kind, the Imperium was executioner. The paradox was glaring, yet it remained concealed in bureaucratic cadence. Thus the galaxy learned to fear its protectors selectively. Stories of triumph traveled. They inspired faith. Stories of human annihilation were buried. They left only ash and silence. Children could name heroes from alien campaigns. They could not name the worlds their grandparents once called home. Faith and fear intertwined. They shaped a galaxy that hailed the Imperium for its victories, yet made the galaxy forget the horrors it wrought upon its own. In the end, history itself became a battlefield. The Imperium controlled not only fleets and firepower, but memory. It chose which deaths to mourn. It chose which victories to sing. It chose which worlds to erase. The line between salvation and execution blurred. What was celebrated on one world was condemned to oblivion on another. And the people, those who survived, those who remembered, learned a lesson harsher than fire. Sometimes the enemy was not alien. Sometimes it was the hand that claimed to protect you. In a quiet archive long after the fires had burned out, a historian opened a sealed hololithic. Its glow illuminated dust-covered glyphs and forbidden scripts. The pages held the truths that no voice was permitted to speak aloud. Names, dates, coordinates, each a sentence carried out in silence. The Imperium's hand had reached across the stars, shaping destinies, erasing worlds. Outside, the galaxy spun on, oblivious. Citizens sang praises for victories against the Xenos. They did not know of Kalor Prime. They did not know of Marek or Soria. The children cheered for Space Marines. They never heard the screams of the humans who perished in secret. Memory itself had been curated, history rewritten. Only the ashes remained to mark what had been lost. The historian read, hand trembling. Words of reports and logs scrolled before him. Exterminatus complete, compliance acceptable, strategic objectives achieved. Each line was sterile, almost banal, yet behind the calm recording lay the weight of millions of lives snuffed out. The galaxy's protector had become its executioner, and no one was meant to remember. In the records, names were reduced to numbers. Cities were reduced to coordinates. Families were erased, their voices lost to silence. Faith was commanded to celebrate what it could not comprehend. Priests had preached salvation even as the fire consumed their congregations. Soldiers had obeyed without hesitation, crushing mercy beneath boots and weapons. It was a machine of purification, grinding, precise, unfeeling. The historian closed the hololithic. He knew that no celebration would follow, no festivals, no triumphs. The galaxy would carry on as if nothing had occurred, yet within the shadows whispers persisted. Survivors carried fragments of memory, tales passed in hushed tones aboard refugee ships. Each story a spark of defiance, a reminder of the lives stolen. Yet these whispers were weak against the machinery of the Imperium. They were ghosts in a galaxy that did not want to remember. He turned his gaze to a map of the sector. Worlds marked, coordinates glowing faintly. Some burned, some erased, some hidden from all records. He thought of the children he had once known in the archives, the innocents stolen. He imagined their eyes looking up at the fleets in awe, believing in angels, never knowing the truth above. And he understood. The greatest enemy was not the Xenos, not the heretic, not the traitor. It was the hand that promised protection. It was the authority that wielded death in the guise of salvation. The galaxy had learned to fear selectively. Celebrated heroes were those who fought aliens. Silent victims were those who shared humanity. Faith intertwined with terror. Obedience maintained through curated memory. And yet somewhere deep in the records the truth endured. For those who would seek it, the evidence remained. A line of smoke on a hololithic, a faint whisper in a refugee vessel, a scorched signature of the Imperium's hand. It was there, if one dared to look. In his chamber, the historian whispered aloud, though no one heard. This is the truth no one is allowed to speak. He traced the coordinates of worlds erased from memory. He read the reports of extermination. And he understood the lesson the Imperium had imposed upon the galaxy. The most terrifying enemy was not always alien. Sometimes it wore the face of the Savior. Sometimes it carried the banner of humanity itself. Outside, the stars shone. They were indifferent to the tragedies below. The fleets rested only briefly before new orders arrived, marking new targets, new worlds. The cycle continued, a litany of fire and silence. The historian's heart ached, but his duty was clear. Record the truth, preserve the memory, even if the galaxy wished to forget. And so it was, and so it would always be. The Imperium claimed to save humanity, yet every act of salvation carried death in its shadow. The fire that cleansed one world would fall upon another. The history that celebrated victories over aliens remained in song. The history that documented the deaths of humans was hidden, buried, classified. Yet for those who looked, who listened, who remembered, the truth burned as brightly as any pyre. In the end, the galaxy could not ignore it. The Imperium's hand reached everywhere, shaping life and death with equal coldness. Heroes and victims were defined not by courage or innocence, but by the Imperium's decree. And the lesson echoed across sectors, whispered in the silence between stars. The greatest threat may not come from the Xenos, the heretic, or the traitor. Sometimes it comes from the hand that promises protection. The historian closed the hololithic. Silence returned to the archive. But within him the fire of memory burned on. A truth untold, yet undeniable. A warning etched into the stars. The Imperium was the guardian of mankind, but also its executioner. And the galaxy would never see the difference until it was too late.